Welcome back to the second part of Corruptible. In the first part, we went over the evolution of power, and then the moth to a flame. So, what kind of person is drawn to power? The power delusion, and whether it's like bad systems or the individual themselves. What kind of personality, characteristics, or traits are present in a lot of people who seek power, maintain power. And so in this second part, we are going to be going over kind of like how power corrupts, how power changes the individual and your body on like a physical level, and why our systems kind of attract the incorruptible. So we're going to be going over all of this. It's not going to be as long as the first part, I don't think, but still some really good points in this second part. So part 8, power corrupts. Called the power approach and inhibition theory, it is, apologies to Keltner and his co-authors, not exactly a memorable phrase that slips off the tongue, but the idea behind it is easily digestible. Essentially, power leads to approached behaviors. People become more likely to take action, to pursue goals, to take risks, to seek rewards, and to self-promote. The powerful approach life like a gambler. If you don't play, you can't win. Power makes people play more and more confident that they'll win. By contrast, the powerless and inhibited, they are reactive rather than proactive. They are cautious, trying to protect what they already have rather than risking it. They are more attuned to threats and danger from others. If the powerful are life's gamblers, the powerless are more likely to cling to the few chips they already have.
I just want to jump in here quickly. This is very much similar to the Peterson sort of lobster chapter, you know?
Yeah.
Like holding your sort of like shoulders back and basically like sort of changing your biochemistry to feel more powerful, because it's kind of true that power sort of begets more power in the sense of, you know, feeling the biochemical cocktail that leads you to think higher status than you actually are.
Yeah.
And this inhibition here, like the people that are like reactive rather than proactive, almost fits exactly that bill too, where he was talking about like hunched shoulders, etc., feeling like you're going to be attacked. Just changes your biochemistry as well.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. Because I guess realistically, there's only two ways it could go. You could either go up or down, right? There's not really even like a stagnant position. You're still like on a micro level going up or down. So if you go up, then you're going to choose to approach that, or if you go down, you're going to cling onto it more.
Yes.
Yeah. Keltner's work on power highlights a clear effect in which powerful people tend to lose their inhibitions. Being drunk with power is an apt description. Increase people's sense of feeling powerful, and they won't care as much what others think of them. They'll become less effective at reading people because they'll feel less of a need to empathize with others. They'll start to feel as if the rules don't apply to them. As Keltner explains, people who enjoy elevated power are more likely to eat impulsively and have sexual affairs, to violate the rules of the road, to lie and cheat, to shoplift, to take candy from children, and to communicate in rude, profane, and disrespectful ways. Lord Acton was right. Keltner wrote The Power Paradox in 2016. The book's thesis is straightforward. He argues that being a good person, someone who is affable, altruistic, competent, and kind, helps you get power. Those traits make others admire you. They put their trust in you. They speak highly of you to their bosses. All of that allows you to rise through the ranks. But then, this is the paradox, those same traits that helped you get to the top are swiftly eroded by the corrosive effects of power, such that you are more likely to abuse your authority once you're on top. And I think that's a really interesting point, isn't it? It's like, you know, these, depending on the context with which you're in, these traits can have different kind of effects and lead to different outcomes.
For sure. And it kind of just makes sense as well that maybe you start to feel these things, especially, for example, when you get into positions of power and people sort of maybe compliment you more, behave a bit differently towards you because they know obviously you can influence their life in different ways.
Yeah.
So then they start treating you more like you are like not I was going to say God, but that you have like a higher status, and then you come to believe, you know, you come to drink your own Kool-Aid, so to speak. And that means you care less about what they think because you're just like, oh well, I can choose, So it's you can understand the logic of how somebody would deteriorate from the position of like, acting kind to get somewhere and then realizing that, everybody's behaving in different ways towards you, and then you start to believe, your own hype.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because all these traits, they're very like interrelational, right? They're all to do with like interacting with others. But as the dynamics change within those relationships, so do the effects of those, traits.
Yeah. And it's one of those things as well, a bit like we talked about, I believe we've talked about it before. I can't remember exactly where on which podcast, but like the idea that, sorry mate, I've actually lost my thought as well.
That's all right.
Damn it. It's so annoying. I had it as well. Wait. Let me just... Why am I struggling to figure this one out?
That's all right.
No, but it's something we talked about so many times before. It's like, you don't have to behave. This is something that I'd love to be interested in. Is like, where does this thought go?
Yeah.
When you're like, you've got the goal.
Yeah.
You're going along the lines.
Yeah.
And then suddenly something completely shifts it, and it just disappears in your head.
Yeah.
Oh. It might come back. Do you know what's going to really annoy me? It's going to come back in a minute.
All right,
It's going to come back.
Yeah.
Let's just continue.
Okay. Okay, fine. All right. Well, you're up next.
Yeah, 1 second. It's going to really bother me. It's going to come back. Anyway,
you don't have to act as what? In these ways? Affable, altruistic, competent.
No. It's like a proper mental blank. It's almost as if, right, when this sort of stuff happens, it's like you were going on a certain path, right?
Yeah.
And then it's completely cut off to the point where you cannot find it, even if you're searching for it.
Yeah.
It's almost like it died. It's almost like the idea died inside of me, because this is the thing I was about to say as well is something we've touched on so many times recently and was so relevant to this that I was like so sure of it that oh god. Anyway, it's gonna come back. It's gonna come back. I'm sure of it. And I get it. It'll be like 20 minutes later, but it's completely irrelevant. Oh, there it is.
I tell you what, you're actually you'll be in the middle of a thought and then forget that thought because you'll remember the other.
Yeah, because I remembered it. Right, cool. We'll move. So, ignore everything I've just said and move on to the next part, which is power and risk-taking. So, another finding, which is robust and replicable, is that power increases risk-taking. In one study, volunteers were randomly assigned to take on the role of either a boss or an underling in a task. Then they played blackjack. Those who had been in the boss role in the previous task were more likely to take an additional card, even when it was risky to do so. This finding makes intuitive sense. People who find themselves in positions of power are, by definition, life's winners. When they've rolled the dice in the past, they've won. Plus, because they're comparatively powerful, they can afford to lose more and still stay on top. Powerless people in precarious positions avoid unnecessary risks because they can't afford to lose. Eventually, once people are so down and out, they feel they have nothing left to lose, they might be more prone to risky behaviour, which is interesting as well.
Yeah.
When I was reading that, I was even about to say, but what about the people who, gamble, even though they got nothing, they got nothing to, nothing to lose, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're at the bottom, so it kind of makes sense. So yeah, bizarrely, feeling powerful doesn't just make you want to take risks, it also gives you a false sense that you can control those risks, even when you quite clearly can't. This notion is referred to by scientists as illusory control. Sorry,
it's really interesting, isn't it? It's like it's kind of like a barbell curve. There are people who will take the risks. Then there are people who are like in the middle who want to hold on to their stuff, and then there are people who have nothing and so can only they're in that position to take a risk because they've got nothing to lose. And it makes that kind of barbell curve. And I was thinking, like, off the back of you reading that, a kind of anti-fragile system, because I remember Nassim Taleb talking about how we should praise the people who tried and failed because they're giving some kind of feedback, and you almost it required the same thing here. And then on that last point there, the kind of illusory control, it kind of ties into, I can't remember which book that we were talking about it, but they were talking about surgeons, I think, or doctors, and how just because you're doing something more and more, I think it was the Deliberate Practice book, Peak, Just because you're doing it more and more doesn't mean that you're becoming more competent. It means that you're becoming more confident. You need deliberate practice to be able to integrate and then like improve. Which is interesting.
Yeah, because on a side note, thinking about it as well, like he was just saying there that obviously the reason why you take more risks is because you've won more, which is why you're in a position of power to some degree, right?
Yeah.
So like your brain sort of reinforcement curve in terms of like you feel positive emotions because you've won, in terms of you're achieving your goals, etc. I mean, I assume you want the goal of being in power, right? Like most people do who get to power, right? So like they reinforce themselves and almost in that instance have convinced themselves that they are capable because they've had that reinforcement again and again and again. And it is similar to what you're saying there with surgeons. Just because they've done the surgery multiple times, let's just say they've got like a weird kink in the way they do their surgery. So like they do it in a weird way where they're like 2% margin out, but they've done it the same way every single time. Eventually they're going to be causing massive damage over a long time because they've sort of habitualized that movement.
Yeah.
It's a bit like with like, if you're learning golf, they quite often like, it depends how far down the line you are, but quite often golfers change their swing because their biomechanics are just like not optimized, for example.
Yeah.
And it kind of reminds me of that a little bit, where you've almost ingrained it into yourself because you've used it or habitualized doing the action again and again and again, that you feel, like you said, confident or too confident because you've always done it that way.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
And confidence isn't to be conflated with, I guess, efficiency and doing a good job, right?
Yeah.
Just because you've done the job the way you've done it in the certain way in the past, if the way to do it also changes and the methods, etc., then you're doing a bad job now, right? Kind of thing. It's almost why people have that like negative view towards maybe like elder CEOs. Sorry, people are like, oh, well, you're from the 60s, you don't get the modern social media age or whatever, and they like. But business to some degree is business, and life to some degree, like they still have wisdom. People always like, oh, well, you don't get the young generation, so you're useless now. It's kind of like that a little bit. But.
Yeah. No, it is a good point, and I think it can like go to your head, and it can like, once again, like the power corrupts, because you think that you're better than you actually are, and you kind of need something to humble you. That's why, in a way, like taking those risks and then getting beaten down sometimes kind of like calibrates your competency, right? Yeah. So on to the next part. So part 9, how power changes your body. Several years ago, Nader and his team of researchers came up with a novel idea. They decided to test how hierarchy, rank, and status affected the experience of using drugs. It was a question worth exploring because drug addiction does seem to affect humans differently depending on their social strata. Who is more likely to get hooked, the alphas on top or those who have fallen to the bottom of social hierarchy? Here's how Nader's experiment works. They take 24 macaque monkeys, that is, and put each in individual pens. No other monkeys, no social hierarchy. Then, once the macaques have gotten used to being solitary, they pull the partitions up. Suddenly, there are 6 groups of 4 monkeys. The pecking order is established almost immediately, with a clear ranking from 1 at the top to 4 at the bottom. They figure out the hierarchy pretty quickly, and it stays that way, Nader says. Once the social order is set, the researchers scan the macaques' brains. They do that to measure the number of dopamine receptors. What Nader and his fellow researchers found when they scanned the macaques was dumbfounding. You can change the proportion and number of dopamine receptors simply by creating hierarchies. What we have shown, Nader explains, is that if the animal goes from an individual's housing situation to a social group, and he becomes dominant when he gets access to cocaine, it's not that reinforcing. Becoming a dominant monkey should, hypothetically, make you less likely to get addicted to coke. So essentially, we should all become alpha males and just go around parading, pumping our chest, so that we don't feel the need to do cocaine, right? Because it won't make any difference. I think that's my big takeaway.
The more I think
from
about
that.
these poor monkeys just taking loads of cocaine.
Yeah.
Or what is going on?
There's just an excuse. You can do loads of drugs, but you're just have to accept that it's because you're a beta male. That's it. Funny.
Oh dear, I was just. Oh no, that's thrown me a little bit. So, the difference between stress and high intensity. Modern societies use the word stress to refer to things that are intense, but not biologically stressful. Plenty of high-powered jobs are intense or have high demand, as Marvel would say, but aren't stressful because we enjoy them immensely and are able to shape their outcomes by having high control. The CEO who is watching his or her startup take off might say that their meteoric rise is stressful, when it's not remotely stressful in physiological terms. It's exhilarating and wonderful. Intense hard work doesn't inhibit normal health processes the same ways that biological stress does. Because we conflate the two in our daily speech, we often misattribute to stress what is actually passion or intensity. And I thought this point was just quite interesting, how there is a difference. And sometimes we do, especially in this modern day and age, conflate the two massively just by using the same word for both.
Yeah.
There is a definite difference between excitable stress and actual like depressive stress.
Yeah.
Experientially, there's definitely a huge difference to that.
Yeah. No, 100%. And I think the level of control kind of determines which kind of stress that is, right? You know, if you have a lack of control, then, you know, it's not going to be as exhilarating. Whereas I can imagine these CEOs or these people who are in charge, like, you know, big high authority like members, it's intense, but it's exhilarating, right? Because they have a lot of control, and they probably live off that.
And before we move on, I actually I had like a really random but related to the point above about these sort of dopamine receptors and tribes and stuff. And I was thinking, like, you know how there's like a massive movement towards more like virtual communities these days. I wonder if it's because a lot of people don't get enough status recognition at school, let's just say, or within their friendship group, that they go off and use the internet to create these new hierarchies of which they like find people who, you know, support the same cause as them, such as, you know, video games or very specific other activities that only they like, right? And they find a way to become more dominant or more respected within a community. So I just realized that this is actually kind of what happens, because obviously it's not a nice position to feel so low, I guess, in the hierarchy, right? And obviously if you just constrain yourself to one location, to one village, to one set of, I don't know, school group friends or university friends, you're unlikely to be accepted by everybody. But obviously what the virtual world has allowed us to do now is to go off and find our own virtual hierarchy groups where we fit in and we can take a level above. And I just thought it was interesting because I wonder if that there's like, you know how there's like talks about men being weak these days and how men, I don't know, are sort of like, what's the word, like going away from the real world. They're kind of going back into
escapism almost.
Yeah, exactly. Escaping into like virtual realities. But at least the virtual realities are giving them a level of status. For example, whether it's video games, whether they're progressing to a character level and they've got friends who are all like, oh my God, you're sick at this or whatever. Or they're talking in like another sport that they're very, like a very specific sport that they're good at. And obviously they get recognition from that. Oh, hello. Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, when I was reading that, that was what I was thinking. And I was like, okay, that makes sense, because if they were measuring the base, like number of dopamine receptors and stuff, and basically being like a lower status, you know, within the tribe, I wondered whether that would be. I wonder if it causes as well, like seeking behavior towards new friends. Do you get what I mean?
Think,
did it automatically think like, okay, these people aren't my people? Because I was thinking about this. If I walked into a group of people who just had completely different values to me, and I would automatically almost feel ridiculed just for like my opinions, or like I would feel like if I opened my mouth and they were like, oh, that's so stupid, why'd you do that, or whatever, you would then feel so low status and shit that you would probably be motivated to go find another group.
Yeah, I think that's the case. I think realistically, you know, we are drawn towards things that are our strengths, but even if we don't know that they're our strengths yet, then we're still drawn to things that could potentially be a strength, right? That is different from the current hierarchy that we're in. I think at school, you're almost not born into, but the hierarchies are already set from the get-go. You don't have a choice in it. When you're a child, you don't get to, you know, you don't have that much control on what you do. That's why I think a lot of people kind of love it when they leave school and go to university, because then there's always you
can reinvent yourself, right?
Exactly.
Because I guess within those hierarchies, you're kind of defined by the value structure of the people around you, and also defined by what they believe you are and who you are. Yeah. Whereas I guess I always used to find it interesting as well when I went on holiday back, even when I was at school, and I met new people, right? I felt like I could try a new identity on. Does that make sense? I don't know if you've ever felt that. You could try to be somebody different almost, right? You could put a different mask on or whatever. You could be more confident. You could do something else different. I just think it's quite interesting. And I wonder as well then if another thing that causes a lot of depression and stuff, whatever, is basically people feeling trapped within these hierarchies and realizing there's more than one game they can play.
Yeah. No, I think that's a big thing, because I think you know, also at school, I mean, school can be brutal, right? Like there are so many like social norms to take into consideration, so many like kind of tribes that like pop up. And unless you find someone that happens to be interested in the same things as you can like feel quite like down because you're stuck in this hierarchy that you can't get out of. And I thought it's been quite interesting when I see schoolmates as like a group after I finished school. And you can sometimes almost feel like you're slipping back into this weird old hierarchy, but that it doesn't like determine who you are anymore. And yet you're like, why am I slipping back into this like position? It's not really a reflection of who I am now.
I get what I actually do get what you're saying. Yeah, it has like a pull, this like construction we have in our heads of where we think we stand within the social hierarchy or whatever. Even though people have had plenty of time to change since school and have changed, including yourselves.
But I think the hierarchy kind of dictates how you can behave, and it can be restrictive. And once you're out of that hierarchy, then you start to explore these other behaviors that you can engage in that you actually enjoy and are more like expressive of yourself. But then when you suddenly like, it's interesting when you go back to these old hierarchies, then you're like, oh, for some reason, why do I feel like these constraints are coming back in again? Like I have to behave like this old version.
Why do I feel this? Why do I feel this pressure or something?
Yeah, it's really interesting.
I'm sure we'll get onto this topic another time through another book, whether it's the archaeology of the mind or whatnot. But Back to the topic at hand.
Exactly. All right. So part 10, attracting the incorruptible, and essentially, I think from here on out in this book, he like provides a bunch of lessons, and they're quite like actionable, but they're kind of actionable on a systemic level. I think they can be applied on like an individual level, but so he just goes through, I think there's 10 different lessons that he puts out, and they all kind of converge on different topics around corruption. So lesson 1, actively recruit incorruptible people and screen out corruptible ones. When it comes to recruitment, there are 3 main ways to screen out bad individuals. First, get plenty of applicants. Second, proactively seek out the kind of people that you want in power. And third, devote sufficient resources to screen out the corrupt and corruptible people who self-select into positions of authority. Broader versus deeper applicant pools. When trying to expand the pool of applicants, you need to pursue both deepening and broadening. A deepening applicant pool is one in which you get a large number of similar applicants to what you already have, which allows you to be pickier. A broader applicant pool is one in which you recruit applicants who are significantly different from what you already have, which allows you to innovate and improve. Both are useful for improving outcomes, particularly when they occur in tandem.
Yeah, so it's worth actually saying here, I've just realised as well, in this chapter, what he's doing is he's grouping the lessons by specific goals, I think. Yeah. So he's grouping these around goals to do with how to attract good candidates and how to attract people who aren't corruptible, basically. And this obviously makes sense to have a broader and deeper applicant pool. The one thing I do think about this type of advice is it's just hard to implement in real life. People are constrained with time restraints, budget restraints. It's like, okay, well, it's all said and good, like deepening the application pool and broadening it, but the actual practice of it is very, very difficult. And I wonder whether that's actually part of the reason why maybe they end up with the more corruptible people, because they basically go, I can't be bothered to deepen it or broaden it because I know the type of person I want, which is like the people we already have here.
Yeah. But also who's designing the system?
Yeah, true. No, exactly. Right. Of course. Yeah. And like if they want somebody who's just easy and manipulatable to come in and like just do the job, then yeah, happy days, easy, isn't it? You just find somebody who showcases signs of weakness, I guess I was going to say. I don't really like the word weakness, but yeah, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So yeah, right. We've now got lesson 2, which I thought was quite an interesting one. So use sortition and shadow governance for oversight. So we shouldn't pretend, however, that better recruitment will be a panacea. Getting sensible, moral people to put themselves forward for the responsibilities and risks of leadership will always be a challenge. If someone was trying to rig the contest, it would be a lot easier to bribe the one person tallying the votes than to bribe 787 individuals to change their guesses. If power corrupts, it's much harder to corrupt random groups of people than it is to corrupt the small, self-selecting group of corruptible people who thirst for power. Therefore, it is necessary to keep the people at the top under watch. And that does make sense, doesn't it? Like, just through pure mathematics, it's a lot easier to bribe one person 787. Like
Absolutely.
you're bound. The more it's the classic thing of like cahoots and conspiracies. Like the more people you get involved, the more chance of it getting out. Right. So it tends to be up in the high echelons where there's very few people, of which they also self-select the board members, etc., whatever. So oversight by sortition has several virtues. First, because it's random, it wouldn't suffer from the problem of corruptible people seeking a position on a shadow board or a citizen assembly. Instead, many of the people in citizen assemblies and shadow boards would most likely be there grudgingly, and that would be a welcome change. That's true. Second, when leaders are acting out of immorality or self-interest, it would often become obvious because it would be such a glaring contrast with the advice of the assembly of a shadow board. The public would have confidence that those drafted into service by sortition aren't making decisions to avoid upsetting lobbyists or because they're worried about alienating a narrow interest group. Cronyism and nepotism would become much harder. Within business, a shadow board would have every reason to think longer term than the quarterly press release and to be an antidote to those who are too myopic. Third, while political systems are often geared toward deadlock, normal people tend to be geared toward compromise. When you and your friends can't decide whether to go to Olive Garden or TGA Fridays, it's rare to have someone walk away and launch attack ads at their rivals about the quality of the breadsticks. But politicians behave like that all of the time, including more normal people in decision-making would put pressure on those who are actually empowered to gravitate towards sensible solutions rather than performative posturing. And I believe, just to add some more context to that, because we didn't really define it, sortition was randomized includements to the shadow board, for example, right? If I remember correctly, it's like randomizing who gets to oversee the board, let's just say. And randomized being taking people from all walks of life, all demographics, so it's a more balanced perspective. A bit like I was saying to you the other day, what we use with like juries and stuff. It's like kind of randomized. You get to go up to use civic duty, but it's not like they're not choosing and selecting without randomization, because if they did that, they could influence the result, right?
Yeah. No, exactly. I think, and we've come across this like point in numerous different contexts, especially in business. Like if you're starting a business, it's good to have like a kind of, or not starting a business, but running a business. It's good to have a kind of rookie perspective that gives you a completely different idea or outlook on a particular decision. And here, I think it's exactly the same. You know, if
you can ask the stupid questions, right, as well.
Yes, exactly. And they just essentially they're not emotionally invested as much, or they don't have a horse in the race, you know? And so it allows them to just give their opinion, and there's no like kind of, there's nothing at stake. But it also like gives a contrast to the person in charge. If they're normally used to making their decisions and just pushing that, then this kind of gives a contrast to that a bit. And I think kind of levels it and calibrates it a bit more.
For sure.
Yeah. All right. So lesson 3, rotate to reduce abuse. When King rose to the ranks and ended up as the Assistant Commissioner for the London Metropolitan Police with a focus on recruitment and training, she realised that the crooked drug cops had given her a valuable insight. If you allow teams, whether it's just 2 uniformed officers or an entire drugs team, to work in isolation from others and to work very closely over a long period of time, that's where quite a lot of corruption cases will come out, King warns. Repeated interactions made people trust more, which made them more comfortable to launch a secret scheme. The solution to this is simple. Rotate people around so nobody gets too comfortable. Fresh blood doesn't just bring fresh perspectives, it also provides antibodies against corruption. And I think in this example, she was talking about how there were a lot of cops working in one particular area and they were becoming corrupt. I think it was to do with like drugs. And so she introduced this thing where like, you know, people had to move around, and because, you know, corrupt people don't like, you know, new people coming in because there's, you know, a risk of it getting out.
Uncovered,
then they kind of feel watched. They feel like they have to kind of behave in a particular way because they know that that person's going to move on, or they're going to move on as well. Rotation is important for 2 reasons. The first is obvious. Anytime a group of people are colluding, an outsider presents a risk. The more outsiders pass through, the harder it is to successfully collude without getting caught. Plus, when insiders who know about crooked dealings move elsewhere, they might spill the beans. Some organizations, countries, or teams have such an ingrained culture of corruption that no amount of rotation will make a difference. Imagine that being in that system where, like, you just jump from one thing to another where, like, everything is just corrupt. It's like it's almost the
I'm sure it happens in some places.
Yeah, I can bet. Rotten in, rotten out. But much of the time, the added risk of exposure from rotation is a deterrent. It stops abuse before it happens. Rotation is also important for an unexpected reason, related to something called the Peter Principle. The concept, which was coined by its namesake Lawrence J. Peter, asserts that people tend to rise to the level of their incompetence. If a system is broadly meritocratic, people who perform well will rise up in the pecking order. But eventually we all hit Peter's plateau, the level at which our skills simply aren't up to the job. We find ourselves in over our head. We're no longer beating expectations. So what happens? No more promotions, no more stellar performances, and that's where lots of people stagnate. Unfortunately, stagnant people are corruptible people, and the prospect of advancement is a powerful carrot to make people behave properly. When people hit Peter's plateau, they lose that carrot and they're more likely to get bored with their job, which is a dangerous combination. Suddenly, someone who was following the rules while hoping to climb to the top might start to skirt the rules out of increased frustration. Rotation helps solve both problems. And I thought that was a really interesting point, because it's just like looking at it from a very kind of fresh angle, and it's taking into consideration our kind of like goals and aspirations in life. You know, if we get to this point where we're plateauing and we're finding it very difficult to derive any kind of enjoy from what we're doing, then yeah, we're going to look for some kind of excitement. To fill that void.
I was gonna add as well, there, I think envy might play a massive role in it as well. So like, let's just say you plateaued, but somebody you're working with is absolutely like killing it because they're basically better than you at your job or whatnot. They rise to a position of power, and then your envy of them might drive you to try and do things that you wouldn't have done anyway to try and like close that gap of status. Whether it's politically assassinate him in a way of like, you know, making up rumors. I mean, I know we're talking about different things here, but well, I mean, I guess that is technically a form of corruption, isn't it? Let's be honest. So, you know, that I feel like that Peter's Principle might even create a sense of envy towards your colleagues, which is never going to be conducive to an overall collective positive effort, right? The moment somebody's feeling that level of envy, as we've seen from the Bible and many other things, it doesn't end well at all. So I'm sure that plays a part in it for definite.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, there's also a benefit to, you know, by rotating and getting experience in multiple different areas, you're also likely to be able to combine all that experience from those different areas and grow.
It's
whether that's in one particular area.
100%, 100%. Like, if anything, this book is kind of like gives a really good manual for running a really good business as well.
It does, yeah.
Anything where there's a system of people behaving or a system of people working together towards a goal, because all of these make sense. Like interviewing people broader and deeper makes massive sense. Having a shadow board or somebody who has no stake in the game to sit above you and be like, why are you making that decision? Asking the stupid questions to realize your assumptions or whatever. Then you've got this obviously next part, shifting people around the business. It makes loads of sense for somebody to get a bit of work experience here, because they might be able to once again do the same thing, ask a stupid question like, why are you guys doing like this? And they'll be like, oh, we've always done it like this. Be like, well, what about this? And it's just like, oh wow, that's a really useful bit of feedback, right? And then funny enough, moving on to the next one, this is also a great lesson for not just business, but obviously for weeding out corruptible people. But lesson 4, audit decision-making processes and not just results. So the real world is mind-bogglingly complex. Minor variations and flukes can drastically shift outcomes. That causes us to wrongly attribute failure to some excellent ideals while heaping praise on terrible ideas that produced improbable success. It's the same for leaders. We wrongly conflate good results with good leadership and bad results with bad leadership. Reality is more nuanced. The lesson is simple. Don't always focus on results and outcomes. Instead, scrutinize the decision-making process much more carefully. This is particularly important for 3 reasons when it comes to evaluating people in power. First, if you reward someone for a job well done when the success was due to luck, then you're more likely to end up with a costly failure from a bad but lucky leader. Yeah. It's like somebody who bets everything on black and then wins, and is like, the most successful.
He knows,
Yeah. Second, people who are good at getting into power are also good at creating narratives that cast them in a better light than reality. They're skilled at making us think they did a good job even when they screwed up. Better scrutiny of decision-making processes can counteract that. I love that bit because it's like so true with all the politicians ever. That it's like, look what many jobs I created. It's like let's just scrutinize the actual like realities of what you've done to the rest of the economy. Like, do you know what I mean? It's just,
that's literally like political speak, isn't it? It's like whenever they're asked a question and they're able to like basically be like, well, it was actually more like this, and they always turn it into a positive.
Isn't it the irony of all of this? I feel like if one of them was just honest, was like, yeah, you know what, we messed up this time. Like, we did this was good, but this is bad. Like a more nuanced take. I feel like all the world is screaming out for is somebody just doesn't say everything's so good all the time.
Yeah.
Because people don't feel like things are good all the time, right? It's like, let's face reality here a little bit. But
well, it's interesting because I fundamentally agree. I think, if they were to fall on their sword and actually be honest, then I think people would very much like respect them for it. However, I think I don't know how many times you could do that if you were to fuck up, and also I don't know whether we would respect them more for it because we're so not used to it that the contrast would be immensely bigger than if everyone did that all the time.
And then also we see the systemic nature of how many fuck ups there are.
Yeah. Yes.
Like how many there actually is, and how many people with like heads you should be calling for, not in like the literal sense, but like your job is gone because I know we're going on a bit of a tangent here, but a lot of the Nassim Taleb's points, like I think he talks about it more in Skin in the Game, is like the fact these people can keep their jobs and they have no accountability for doing stuff wrong, and they also then always cherry pick the state, like the stats that make them look the best. Biden's always like, I got this much unemployment, but unemployment doesn't matter if you're hiring people to do really shit jobs and the government's doing it just to hide the unemployment rate, which is often what they do. They can just hire a bunch of people to do specific projects which aren't really relevant to anything. And be like, look at the employment rate, it's dropped. Like anyway, and third, good leaders sometimes look bad during selected snapshots in time, even though they're doing everything right. That can cause us to wrongly jettison good leaders or hang on to bad ones. The worst leaders are too willing to saddle their successes with impossible challenges that they delayed dealing with, creating the illusion of smooth sailing until the new leader took control. I like this one a lot, by the way, because it's so true. Like, for example, the governments right now could be building up all this massive debt piles, passing it down. It's smooth sailing for them because they're just spending money, spending. Yeah. Then somebody's going to come in and have to make the hard decision, and they look like the arsehole. But the reality is, the people before them have fucked up the situation. It's just like, it's like basically living off in something in a company, basically, what's the word? Sabotaging all their sales, but looking really good at the time. You leave, and then everything just drops off a cliff afterwards. And I'm sure it happens a lot because people can, if you're in a position of power and you know where it's going, you can get out of power when you want. You'd be like, I've done my job. It's plain set. Like, I did my job. It's on to you now.
No, exactly. I mean, and then you have then you have another party that comes in and does exactly the same thing, and then everything just keeps getting pushed down the road. Yeah, exactly.
Kicking the can down the road, man. It's just because and obviously to the point where when it actually does implode, it's going to be like
me, mate. And I reckon it's around the corner.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised, man. Such manipulations make it even more likely that we'll reward those who did the wrong thing but managed to get away with it by spin, deception, or gaming the system.
Mm-hmm.
Avoid that trap, we must assess the decision-making itself and carefully scrutinize results in the proper context. The problem is that nobody investigates how a decision was reached when everything turns out well. We have commissions for disasters, not successes. That needs to change. Because chance plays such an enormous role in success or failure, we should also routinely investigate successful outcomes that may have been produced by procedural failures. Yeah. And I quite like this idea of as well, of just like understanding why the decision was made. Like, why did, what's his name, Nick Hancock give the mask contract to one of his friends?
Yeah.
Just questions on what was the decision-making process behind that? I would love them to have public accountability of writing out the decision process.
Yeah.
Why did you make this policy decision? Give us the reasoning, It's such a simple change, but how much more faith would you have in people if you could actually understand the reasoning behind it by decisions, right?
Yeah.
It's just nuts.
Or that they would have to provide a reason for doing it,
Yeah, but like it's just...
I feel like a lot of the time...
Why have you made this decision?
Yeah.
Yeah, like...
But once again, what we were talking about in the last part, there are so many... I mean, people who do commit little fraud rarely get caught because there's bigger fish to fry. And I reckon in a political landscape there are a lot of decisions made all the time, and not all of them can go under the same level of scrutiny, and so they don't need to justify their actions all the time.
How many layers of decisions are there?
Exactly.
How many people have to sign off on decisions as well? And then I don't know. It's a weird one. Also, once again, with all the stuff we were saying earlier, we don't know the problem they're facing. So the dirty hands thing, and we actually don't know the problem they're solving. And maybe it's part of when we review the Why Leaders Lie, a lot of their justification is around public security and like the nation's security. So it's like, oh, this is sensitive information. If we reveal that we have a shit economy, everybody won't invest in our economy, and our stocks will go to shit. Basically, that's it. It's almost like puffing your chest because if people realize the reality, everybody would panic. So it's almost like, no, we're all okay, we're fine. It's like,
it's just
how long
ironic
can that go on for?
being afraid of reality.
Yeah.
All right, so moving on, part 11, the weight of responsibility. So lesson 5, create frequent, potent reminders of responsibility. That's a crucial lesson for most people. Constant reminders of how their decision could affect others can create more self-reflection and therefore improve behavior. Wherever power can be abused, it's crucial to remind those who wield it of their corresponding responsibility. Sometimes such reminders are created by design, as with the letters of last resort. Letters of last resort refers to when prime ministers change, they have to send out a letter to their, like, I think it's like the what is it? It's something to do with like nuclear war. And if someone fires like a nuclear weapon at them, do they retaliate? Do they let it go? Do they there are like 4 options, and they have to like confront that and send it out to like their next of kin in case, or the next in charge. And I think he was interviewing, was it, who's the guy who started the Iraq war?
Bush?
No, the British
Blair?
one. Yeah, Blair, there we go. The war criminal. Yeah, no, he interviewed him for this, and he was like, oh, how does that make you feel, like, when you had to sign, because the first day of them being prime minister they have to do this, so it kind of like grounds you. And so that's essentially it, like, having those kind of reminders that say you're dealing with people's lives here, or your actions hold a lot of weight. So other times you don't need to design anything. The harrowing reminders are built in. Surgeons, for example, are haunted by patients who died on their operating table. So to create better behavior, you have to twin reminders of responsibility with another psychological tweak. Show people in positions of authority the costs and consequences of their actions. If those in authority aren't made deeply uncomfortable by human faces right in front of them from time to time, they are probably not doing their job right.
Yeah. I quite like this idea of reminding you of the consequences of your actions a lot. And I quite like the idea of it also being used at potentially like a personal level.
Yeah.
So like, you know how obviously on cigarettes they have like, obviously your lungs like basically being busted and obviously like cancer and stuff on it, and reminds you before you make the choice. But I wonder if you could actually put stuff in like with social media as well, like where it's like, as you're about to scroll, it's like you're about to waste 30 minutes of your life.
Yeah.
Do you continue? Do you kind of get what I mean? Like a frequent reminder of the consequences of the current action or the decision you're about to make.
Yeah.
Same with exactly. Same with a video game, for example, where before you even press play, it's like the average person plays this game for 30 hours. You're about to give up 30 hours of your life. Do you want to continue?
Yeah.
Do you get what I mean? Like a last gap reminder of the responsibility or like the cost of your decision. And I know it's kind of slightly different about this with responsibility, but I just quite like the same idea of like making you realize the consequences at the moment you decide, because obviously we all make such small decisions every day. And it's funny enough, even with like the really, really small decisions, because I'm actually reading that Clear Thinking by Shane Parrish at the moment. And he's talking a lot about how obviously making decisions in the ordinary moments, and it's the ordinary moments that add up to your life.
Yeah.
But like the moment you decide between a Big Mac or a salad kind of thing. And I'm just thinking, it's at those moments where you almost need like a really manual stop to remind you of the consequences and the responsibility you have to your future self, let's just say. The responsibility you have to your dream is being tested at every moment you make a decision. I just wonder if that's like something you can add to somebody's life day to day, like a pit stop. But
I used to kind of integrate it into my like journal. It was something that Jordan Peterson used to talk about, where when you engage in an action, think about how it's going to affect you on an individual level, your future self, and a societal level, and like 10 years down the line, like what is the impact or the consequences of your actions. And I think you have to kind of I think it's probably worth stopping and thinking, what's the purpose of what I'm about to do, and does that align with my ideal self and my future self? And like, now,
and then also, like you just said there, and the collective.
Exactly.
And a societal level, right?
How does it ripple out and affect society?
And there's actually a big thing to be said of, like, because of the way we mirror and copy each other socially, if you're continuing with an antisocial behaviour, you're basically normalising it. So now I can kind of understand the left's move towards, oh, you're normalising the behaviour. I kind of, like, I can see it now, like, a little bit. Like, your decision to consciously do that action again and again is normalising a behaviour.
Yeah.
So I can kind of understand that argument now. But yeah.
No, I think it is very important.
We'll move on only because the next part is almost relevant exactly to the same thing, which is lesson 6. Don't let those in power see people as abstractions. So, unfortunately, insistence on eliminating the abstract nature of decision-making is rare in today's world. It's easier than ever before to be a desk monster, someone who damages, destroys, or even ends lives without leaving the comfort of an office chair or seeing the suffering indicated firsthand. Entire industries exist to divorce uncomfortable decisions from the visual fields of those who make them. These jobs often have euphemistic names such as corporate downsizing specialists or termination consultants. They can save your boss the trouble of feeling a bit of emotional discomfort from firing a long-time employee, outsourcing it to someone else. But why does that matter? What happens when serious harms get sanitized down to a euphemism and the people who are deciding to inflict pain on others never see it firsthand? And this is such a good point, because back to the responsibility, it's like, if you just see them as a number and an abstraction, you're more likely to take the action.
Yeah.
And I think I've said this story before, and it was something along the lines to do with the nuclear code button. It's like, if the president, I think it was something like, hide the keys in the heart of somebody.
Yeah.
So the president has to carve it out of somebody before they can use it.
Yeah.
And it's like, you have to then kill somebody firsthand because that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
And I thought that's such an interesting way of thinking about it. But it's true, because this not only just applies, I guess, to positions of power as well, but it also applies to people day to day. I know just seeing a number on a screen, but that's a human being. Like, we do it all the time. We see loads of people like online, and you just think, whatever, you send something that's quite nasty or whatever. It's just like, well, that's just because it's a person on screen doesn't mean it's like any less a person who has feelings and dreams and aspirations. And it's so funny, actually. I think we said this a couple of times before. Imagine when you sit down and you just watch people, and then you think, wow, these are all people with like, it sounds so basic and simple, and it's not really that profound of an insight, but everybody around you has a life, dreams, hopes, aspirations. But it's something we almost see other people to some degree as aliens. Do you get what I mean? Like, you kind of like walk around, you're just like, you don't see below the surface. Let's just put it that way. You're not really thinking like, oh wow, what makes this person like act this way? What are they doing here? What is their dream? What do they want to be? Who do they want to be? Yeah. Who are they to somebody else? We never really think these things. We just it's just another person. There's 7 billion of us,
Yeah, no, it's true. I think it depends what context, but I think it's unfeasible to do that all the time.
Of course,
you wouldn't be able to. And it's like, I find it nuts when, you talk about war and, a bullet. Like, it's those scenes in like war films where, someone sticks their head up above the like bunker,
parapet.
and suddenly they get shot, and it's like that person's dead like that, and that's 26 years of memories, of relationships, of all these like things, and you're just like, fuck me. But we become so detached in so many things because we can't focus on that all the time, and it is insane, that kind of emotional distance. And I think the digital landscape definitely adds to that. Hence why like a lot of trolls can do it, or why people can get away with certain behavior online, because they can't be held accountable, and there's that barrier between them to actually think of the person in front of them like as another human being. I mean, even take like followers or listeners. I mean, it's insane when you think that some of these people have like 80 million subscribers. I mean, can you envisage what 80 million people look like? I mean, that's insane. It's actually insane. I mean, some of the people like, what is it, The Rock, who's got like 140 million. God knows how many are bots, but still, like, that's obscene. You've never once ever had that many people all in one area, so you can't even imagine. You can't imagine how many people that is. It's
it's a newfound type of power as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, that sort of audience was unseen, like unheard of before. You could only go as far as your voice could carry you, sort of thing. Obviously, microphones, etc., printing press, but now it's just mental to the reach and the influence some people have. And
that's why I think a lot of companies have a lot more power than some governments, because they have more customers It's like I remember
They have more eyeballs than the government, that's for sure, man. For
Yeah.
example, how often do I hear from HMRC? Probably once a year to do my tax return.
Yeah.
Like the people who should be informing us all of how we should pay our tax stuff. Yeah, I feel more. My media is more conformed with like cat videos and shit.
Yeah.
We spend more time thinking about the stuff that doesn't matter than we do the stuff that does matter, and it's it probably shows, doesn't it?
Exactly. Like I can't remember. I think it was in a tech book that I was reading. Like I feel like tech was in the title anyway, and they were talking about how Uber drivers in London weren't vetted. They weren't vetted anywhere near to the same extent as like black cab drivers. And so they could be like ex-criminals, and there were like lots of cases of like, women being raped from Ubers and blah, blah, blah. And so that's why they were like under investigation, and why they had to like, renew their license and stuff like that. And Uber was able to send out like a notification to all of their customers. And obviously to us, it's like, yeah, okay, that sounds terrible, but I need an Uber. I need to get to work, blah, blah, blah. And to sign a petition that allowed Uber to then like proceed with these kind of things. And that right there is like overpowering a government in that situation, right? Because they have so much like weight, like realistically.
They have so much reach.
Yeah, they have so much influence.
Yeah.
Right? Like what's going to affect you more, some abstract long-term goal or something that affects you right here, right now? And so, yeah, it's scary how much power some of these companies have.
Yeah, I was going to say, even I just finished reading as well Stolen Focus, which is all about like obviously paying attention, ADHD and stuff like, and to do with like Facebook and all the other media companies who've like sort of hijacked our attention.
Yeah,
and the power they have just through the habits they made us build up around the usage of their applications. But like you just said, the reach. Like let's just say Facebook getting done for something, or Instagram. Like you just said, they could just send out a petition notification that they would get like way more votes than ever possible by anybody else on anything, because they have the reach of everybody on their platform.
Yeah.
So, for example, let's say you had a political campaign. You go onto those. What's the one in England called? Which you do like political campaigns, and you get people to sign it. Petition. Is it just petition.org?
I think that's one of them. Yeah.
It's something like that. But anyway, you have to then disseminate that through the platform itself, of which, depending upon what people think, you get reach depending on how many people share it, right, and how many people care. These motherfuckers can just fucking everybody. How many people does Facebook have? Like 2 billion or something like that? I can't even remember. Some crap like that. But straight to everybody, if they care about something enough, they could. I'm sure they won't do that because they get absolutely destroyed for doing it. Well, but they could.
Yeah, but you say that, but then like also look at like the kind of horizontal integration between a lot of these platforms like YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and the medical boards and the government during COVID. I mean, the amount of censorship that went on, and that's even more terrifying, because not only is it like one government saying it, it is now multiple countries that use these platforms, and so that influence is huge. It's now governments that kind of spread over loads of different countries.
Yeah.
Yeah,
under the guise of science, as we said. And if anybody's listening and wants to hear more about that, go listen to the Psychology of Totalitarianism, because that's like a pretty much like 4-hour deep dive into this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, sorry, we've diverged again, but I thought it was relevant. So let's get back to the matter at hand. So specificity matters. The more we encounter a person, the less the person becomes a category. As we peel back the layers of a person's personality and their inner life, they move close to the center of our social and psychological onion. The opposite is true too. If someone remains an abstraction, it's much easier to not care about the person. I mean, I guess also, especially if you add negative labels, right?
Yeah.
Like classic tribalism, like they're all like this, they're all like that.
Yeah.
It's become routine for executives in Western capitals to make decisions that drop toxic sludge half a world away, or drive up the price of life-saving drugs in the world's poorest countries without ever setting foot in them. It's increasingly common to get fired by people who work in a corporate headquarters that you've never visited. That should give us a cause for concern, because our moral inhibitions are lessened as the space between us increases. And it is, I wonder as well if, because I was going to say this point a second ago, but I believe it was this book, or maybe it was another book. I think, no, it is this book, isn't it? About the chapter on the psychopathy and empathy, and the idea that we can train ourselves to be empathetic by putting ourselves in a position of thinking about the other person's suffering.
Yeah.
So we can feel others suffering. And my point here was going to be is, if we feel the suffering, we feel guilty, we feel horrible. So we ignore it. So I would say we almost push the suffering aside. like apart from those that are super sensitive to suffering, right? They're the ones who probably actually going to hold themselves into a straight and narrow line and not commit anything like this. But there's some people out there who probably do feel some form of suffering when they think about it. So what do? They don't think about it.
Yeah.
They make these decisions. They live life on alcohol. There's that
Well, I think
stereotype
it's kind of how,
like where they numb themselves with drugs because they realize if they actually have to sit back and think about what they've caused, they don't sit well with themselves.
Yeah, I think like a prime example would be how we interact with homeless people, right? We don't want to actually acknowledge their position because it's not very nice, and so we choose not to do anything, right? We deflect it, we neglect it. Yeah, obviously we're talking about like more of a business or political like situation, but I think the same thing.
It's the same.
Yeah,
it's the same.
We
same
don't like
behaviour,
feeling
isn't it,
pain.
Of course not.
Right?
That's why you don't look as well in the eyes.
Yeah.
For example, when another one which is slightly different to homeless, but I have all the time when I'm walking in Paris, these people who try and like wave at you to try and talk to you.
Oh yeah.
And I it's just when you look at them in the eyes and then you get that whole like you have to talk, and then you hate the fact that like I'm gonna make them suffer if I like move away. So you kind of like, it's just I hate it.
Yeah.
But it is that we all have it built in us, right? This idea of like when you look, you feel it.
Yeah.
So what do? We don't look. That's what I think it's.
Yeah. I wonder whether you could. I wonder whether you could leverage. Do you remember when we were talking about? Was it factfulness or no? Maybe not. But it was like the reciprocity rule. The idea that like if you give someone a gift, then they feel obligated to give something back, right?
Yeah.
I wonder whether you could harness that or leverage that in a scenario, being like these people have provided this, almost like trying to get across this idea that they've provided something, so that you almost feel obligated to give something back and therefore acknowledge them. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Rather than like looking over them or like trying to deflect whatever situation that you're in. Because I'm just thinking about a politician like making a decision, and it's very easy to just like obviously see them first of all as like numbers, that might affect this many lives. But then also you need to try and like empathize it and like create emotional like proximity. And I wonder whether one way of doing that is kind of leveraging that kind of reciprocity rule in some form or another. I don't know.
Some form.
Yeah.
I mean, on a very small scale, those people who walk around and give out roses are trying to work on that reciprocity. Like they kind of give it out to you for free and they try and charge you, don't they, afterwards? I guess it's not really giving it to you then, but it's kind of playing on that sort of thing. They make it out as if it's a gift.
No, exactly.
They'd actually be better off to give you one rose and say, how about you buy a second one? That would probably work better. Yeah. Instead of giving you the rose and charging you for it, be like, give you one, and then be like, how about you buy a second one?
Yeah.
Because then it makes they'll be like, feel guilty for taking one and not reciprocating.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Look at that.
There we go.
I'll become a consultant to some of these
guys. All right, so on to part 12, watched. If God did not exist, it would be necessary to invent him, Voltaire. And it was interesting because I remember when I read this quote and then the following chapter, I was like, okay, this makes a lot of sense. And I do resonate with that a lot. It's very Jordan Peterson-esque. Okay, so lesson 7. Watched people are nice people. Ordeals provide a crucial insight. We behave better when we believe we're being watched by a force that could punish us. We're more honest too, because there's a greater risk that our lives will be exposed. Crucially, just the threat of punishment is often enough to induce better behavior. The oversight of God. For thousands of years, our devil within has partly been subdued when humans have feared the watchful gaze of a deity looking down from above. Today, billions believe in God who will punish us for our sins. That belief is so common that it seems as if it must be a natural human impulse. But it's not. Back in the Stone Age, people didn't likely see gods as moral enforcers. Noren Zayan argues that the spectre of divine surveillance served a useful purpose for society. Because people believed they were being watched, they behaved more virtuously than they would have otherwise. Big gods made people fear being caught well before detectives or investigative journalists existed. Furthermore, because society held a shared belief in the same god or gods, Noren Zayan says that religiosity built up social trust. If everyone believes in divine punishment, then a shopkeeper can have more faith that you'll pay back debt. Both of you know that you'll inevitably pay for it, either in this life or the next. Just as nuclear weapons act as a deterrent because of mutually assured destruction, religion produces another form of MAD, mutually assured damnation. Shared belief creates social cohesion. Without government enforcement, something else had to fill the void. Norenzayan argues that big gods filled that without them. Many such societies would have descended into far worse chaos and disorder. And I think that there's, like, I find it such an interesting point because I so see this in society, that I think, in prehistoric times, or like when we were hunter-gatherers, because the tribes were so small, our reputation was always on the line. We did feel watched, whether we believed in a god or not back then. But obviously, as our tribes grew and grew and grew, there wasn't some kind of overseer, and so it kind of was almost needed.
Necessary.
It was necessary
Yeah.
to create something that could watch over us. And now, like, that kind of religiosity, although it still exists to some extent, not so much in England, it's kind of been replaced by kind of surveillance, by a government, something that feels like you're being overwatched. But actually, I think over experience, like we were talking about with people who can commit loads of little frauds, you figure out the system, you figure out that you're not always being watched, that you can get away with certain things. Yeah.
And because there's no divine watcher outside of who's watching you no matter what, then you don't actually really like change your behavior. I mean, people still do live, I guess, to some degree based upon the values they believe to be like correct.
Yeah.
Like, I feel people do feel some form of level of pain. It's not to say everybody's chaotic and devilish or whatever, but I do agree with the point of once that disappears, people are more inclined to behave on their worst impulses and not bad for the fact that there's no repercussions.
Well, I think also off the back of that, like you said, emphasis on the divine. If someone if Jesus judges me, right, then I'm more likely to take on board what he says because he is the pure life form. He is the person who embodies all the right values, the things that like society should be built on, right? Like that idea of the divine, right? Whereas governments aren't, and they prove to themselves time and time again how undivine they are and how corrupt they can be. So I think in this regard, it's difficult. I think that adds another like level of complexity to it, where do I feel compelled to do something for a government that I think is corrupt, right? Why do they get to judge me, right?
I'm just laughing because I'm just thinking about Jesus doesn't take 20% of my income.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, funny.
It's like that's the kind of level of difference, is like forced extraction, I guess, to some degree. Like, but like this is the thing as well. I feel like what's happened is, so Christianity and religious rules have kind of informed the legal system, which has been developed over hundreds of years, right? So the morality system is kind of based upon those teachings anyway, but it's being enforced without the understanding of the reasoning behind why they're there in the first place. And I guess people don't, I guess, have an appreciation for the fact that these sort of moral virtues to some degree need to be upheld, because if they don't, people copy each other and then they all commit many sort of devilish acts, and eventually, as Peterson says, that goes down to the sort of chaotic world where there's no clear-cut rules and everybody's sort of out for themselves, and it goes back to sort of more wild, I guess, more chaotic. I don't really know how else to say it.
Well, yeah, exactly.
You can kind of see how it happens. You can see how it happens for sure.
And I think it's a belief is just such like an important thing, and the belief that, well, when we used to all believe in those kind of values, it would make a lot of sense because it can't be like contested. But now that we don't, and we just follow literal like rules that are like put in law, the fact is that those rules don't exist. They're man-made, right? And so they can always be changed. I mean, like, we created Magna Carta in when was it, like 1252 or something, which was supposed to be an example of like, the individual citizen has rights. And yet throughout COVID, that was completely obliterated. So my point being is in like, we follow in something that it can constantly manipulate itself and change the rules, because there's not like a higher virtue that everyone believes in. I think that is that's what's scary. But there's no right, like you said before, like, yes, okay, there should be human rights, but it's not like a given thing. It doesn't actually exist.
It's not a God-given thing. No, it's a human-given thing that we've all kind of agreed upon. Fuck, it's deep,
very deep. All right, so moving on.
So lesson 8: focus oversight on the controllers, not the controlled. So here's the problem: our modern surveillance systems have everything backward. They should be inverted. We're watching the wrong people. The 21st century panopticon should be turned inside out so the people in power feel as if they're the ones being constantly watched. In fact, constantly watching people, especially those who aren't in power, is a pretty good recipe for dystopia. But to inch forward toward a utopia instead, we should make people in authority think that they can be watched at any time. That provides a middle ground that allows us to avoid constant invasions of privacy, while still making those changes. Making those in charge think twice before they abuse their power. And that is such a good point. I love that. Like, I forgot about this one completely, but it just makes so much sense that the people who have the, like we said before with the other points, the dirty hands problem and the opportunity problem, they have the opportunity to create the most damage through immoral acts.
Yeah.
So they should be the ones who are being watched. If one of us goes out and makes an immoral act to some degree, not like, I'm not saying like killing somebody, which is obviously terrible. I'm talking about something small scale fraud, right? You do something which costs somebody £2 or some crap like that. Damage, bad, fraud, whatever. It is bad, don't get me wrong. But it's not the same as somebody who has the power to multiply that total by 20,000.
Yeah.
And yet I'm the one who's being tracked for the missteps and not the people who have the option to create the biggest, changes, let's just say. And like, when you think about it out loud like that, it just makes so much sense to have it. I'm not against still being monitored.
No.
Like, it's a two-way system.
To a degree.
You should be allowed to be monitored, but you should be able to monitor the monitorers. Like,
but that's what I found. What I find so funny off the back of this is how a scenario will be created where the top down, the people at the top, create a dynamic whereby they can watch all of you, but they say that you guys should watch each other. I mean, how much of that was like, I keep coming back to it. I feel like I'm just a record on replay, but during COVID, how everyone was like calling each other out, be like, you're not allowed to do that, you're not allowed to do that, but we're not looking at the people above who are making all the rules, right? It's almost like it keeps us preoccupied because we think everyone else is watching us, and they don't actually, it kind of like deflects our attention. It kind of creates like a kind of call out society. Obviously that's a bit of a different point here, but I think it is crucial that we keep more of a watchful eye on the people who have the most power in the decisions. And I think in this case, when he says the 21st century panopticon, I might get this wrong, but I think it was designed by was it Francis Galton, who's the guy who kind of like put forward the idea of like eugenics, and he was I think a cousin to Darwin, funnily enough, but he created this like idea of like a prison, which a lot of prisons are based on now, the design of it, where there is like one watchtower in the middle and they can see everyone below it, but actually it should be the reverse, where like we can see the person in the middle. All right, so lesson 9: exploit randomness to maximize deterrence while minimizing invasion of privacy. Constant surveillance for anyone is unhealthy. Constant surveillance for a run-of-the-mill worker is downright unacceptable, but randomized integrity testing for those who have plenty of opportunity to cause serious harm is usually justified. That, combined with more robust oversight from nosy journalists, can go a long way in deterring the most avoidable abuses in our society.
Yeah, it just makes sense as well to have like randomized checks. It's a bit like randomized drug tests for sports people.
Literally.
Randomized policy tests. Let's just see what you've been saying behind the closed doors. Let's just see you're not scheming. Last part then, part 13, waiting for Cincinnatus. Lesson 10: stop waiting for principal saviours, make them instead. Instead of waiting for our principal saviours to leave their farms, a more realistic goal is to change our systems to make ordinary people behave like Cincinnatus, answering the call to power rather than seeking it, and relinquishing control rather than relishing its intoxicating effects as it corrupts us. Which I thought, that reminds me that whole chapter was about Cincinnatus, wasn't it? He was like was it a Roman leader?
Yeah,
I'm going to butcher this, but he basically came into power, didn't he? He then retired, and then he got called back into power when he was on his farm or something to take back power of Rome or something, and then he gave it up once again after he finished his job of making the state better. Yeah, and I like that. Like, somebody knows when their job's done. Yeah. And not just clinging to it like for the life of them.
Well, you shouldn't seek power for the sake of seeking power, right? You should seek. You shouldn't seek power. You should seek the the nature of what the job
the betterment
requires,
the betterment of the objective that you're using the power to attain.
Yeah.
I think it's quite interesting as well, looking at some of these like lessons and stuff, and then you think about the US Senate system where they've all been in power for like 30 years or some crap.
Yeah.
Like, what? There's no like mobility within that, and they're the ones who kind of call the shots above the government, right? Like they're the people who get like the votes put towards and shit. I'm just like, what? Maybe that's probably completely ignorant on my part there, but I definitely know for a fact that they, in the Senate, I believe, they've had people in there who've been there for years.
Yeah.
So if anybody can correct me, put it in the comments, because I'd love to know more. But I'm pretty sure some of these rules would apply quite nicely to this sort of thing where there's no mobility. And like, once again, as we know, if there's no rotation, there's more chance for colluding, right? Like it's...
no, absolutely.
So yeah, we've got the summary of the lessons next. So none of these dynamics are set in stone. However, better people can lead us. We can recruit smarter, use Sortition to second-guess powerful people and improve oversight. We can remind leaders of the weight of their responsibility. We can make them see people as human beings, not abstractions, before the powerful turn them into victims. We can rotate personnel to deter and detect abuse. We can use randomized integrity tests to catch bad apples. And if we're going to watch people, we can focus on those at the top who do the real damage, not the rank and file.
Yeah.
Voila.
Yeah. No, I really liked that kind of like those last 4 chapters. I think they really kind of...
Once again, like they're really actionable as well. Like all of those ones there can be applied even now on a small scale.
Yeah.
Like even if you've got a few of you in a little group or something, you can use these.
Yeah. No, 100%. It just gives like a bit of a plan. I think, to be honest, I think a lot of this needs to be implemented on like a systemic level. Obviously, you can I think on an individual level it's more about like changing your belief about corruption, maybe seeing where it could be, and also just not jumping to the conclusion that there is always corruption there, or that the individuals are corrupt and they might be within a bad system or being dealt a bad hand. But on a systemic level, I think it's crucial to implement some of these things, because I think more and more we're just getting to a point where the corruption is becoming like so prevalent, you just can't turn away. You can't turn a blind eye. And I think one of the main things is just like I remember going through my Twitter, and like this guy, I can't remember who was like, what is the biggest lesson that we need to learn or something? It was like holding authority accountable for their actions. And I think that just couldn't be said enough. I think that is key, because so many people get to make decisions that are fit with their agenda, and it causes loads of destruction or collateral damage in the process.
But then if they mess up, they never get fired. Like if you mess up in your job, you get fired, right?
Well, it's the skin in the game thing, isn't it?
It's skin in the game. Like the good old days where if you build a bridge, you got to stand under it as they remove the supports away. It's the same thing. Like if you made a decision that's caused the livelihoods of like a population to lose their livelihoods, you should lose your livelihood immediately.
100%.
If not, like an eye for an eye.
Yeah. That was Corruptible. So those are all the leftover chapters. But in terms of the actionable points, well, we've just gone over those 10 lessons. In the first part, though, I think we touched on a couple of things. So there was the 3 levels of survivorship bias that need to be explored. So, first, who seeks power, having an understanding of that really helps, along with like who gets power and then who maintains it. Kind of really builds out that kind of character who are in these like positions that kind of exploit their authority and who are most likely to become corrupt. And then I think one of the like points that we really liked was the 4 phenomena that Brian Klaas put forward before like assuming corruption. So the dirty hands, learning to be good at being bad, opportunity knocks, and under the microscope. So all like dirty hands was more. What was the dirty hands bit about again?
The dirty hands was that people in power have to make decisions that we don't have to, where there's no real like morally good choice. It's kind of like the lesser of the 2 evils. So therefore we're judging people through a skewed perspective, because no matter what choice they make, they're going to cause some damage, hence the dirty hands. And then the learning to be good was probably my least, not least realistic, it's the one I thought was the least not coherent either, like compelling, I guess is the best way of putting it.
No, I
where
get
the people in power basically we have a skewed perspective because they learn to be good at being bad. They learn to be able to commit fraud better. Don't really see that happening as much as the other stuff, where I think dirty hands is a huge factor. So having to just make a bad decision, no matter what decision they make,
right?
is exactly. So that for me obviously skews perception of like why they're bad. Opportunity knocks is a huge one for me, which is they have the opportunities to cause more damage, and they have more frequent opportunities to commit fraudulent / corrupt actions. Like, how often do you have the opportunity to make bank based upon like doing a deal with somebody in your life? Probably you have zero, whereas these guys forever are getting opportunities to give government contracts to either friends or families, or companies that are linked to them in other countries or whatever, right? And then under the microscope as well, which I thought was a super interesting point about how it skews our perception of corruption in the higher echelons of society, whatever you want to call it, is because we put them under the microscope. We're constantly viewing what they do, and if we're not constantly viewing it, some people are constantly trying to figure out what they're doing to then uncover it, and therefore it goes into way more detail than the average person. So let's just say some politicians committed some sort of crime and there's only one, but it's because we followed them through to the very end to find out. But if you sort of look around to the rest of the population and start putting them under the microscope, we probably see fraud as well. So I thought that was a really interesting point, because often we are very quick to blame as that's corruption, that's corruption, that's corruption, when it's like, hang on a second, they are more likely to be researched when they do anything. They've got no easy choice to make. They also have lots of opportunities to commit it, and therefore I think one of the other points with the opportunity knocks was, let's just say they make one bad decision out of 10. What if the general population makes 2 bad decisions out of 10? Are they really worse than us? But then the question is, what's the damage caused by it? So that's like the mitigating factor, right? So
no, they were really interesting points. And it just kind of goes to show, like, I'm glad that he included that in the book, because I think when we're talking about corruption, there is this kind of inclination to just assume everything is corrupt. It kind of what you think is like confirmation bias. You almost don't want it to be true, but you know it is, and so you just are going to see it everywhere, and you reduce it down to this kind of simplistic.
It's got an emotional dimension to it. It's got an emotional dimension to it, where the moment you hear of injustice and maluse of authority to some degree, it riles up massive vengeance-seeking emotions, I guess you could say, or and aggressive emotions within humans, to see a bit like that reverse dominance hierarchy, which the idea of like not wanting to be dominated by others also is quite a good idea. Like it kind of reminds me of that. It's like, not only do we dislike having people above us, really, but we hate being told what to do. And then what we hate even more than that is seeing them benefit from their position, of which we don't think they should even be in the first place. So it's I do think the thing about this type of stuff as well is, even just speaking about the last couple of points then with you, with the how we're all being watched way more than the people who are making decisions. And the reality is the people who are making decisions should be watched more, because the repercussions of what they do impacts everybody else. Even that, I just that riles me up a little bit. I get angry thinking about the fact that they don't have the same level of surveillance as the general population. And there you go. Once again, I'm making, as Shane Parrish and Clear Thinking would say, is I'm thinking with my emotions too much there. But at the same time, the emotions exist for a reason. Because if I thought rationally about it, I could come up with a rational reason for why they're doing it, to safeguard humanity or whatever. But then it could be misused. It could be misused. You could put it in the wrong hands. It could be misused. So sometimes emotion is a good way to decide, I guess. That's what I'm trying to say. I've come full circle. I was really like, don't trust your emotions, but now I'm like, actually trust them. But it's balance, isn't it? And there is always an emotional dimension to status and domination, so to speak, because it is domination. It's like the fact you've got people who can tell you what to do, and with basically the underlying threat of all of it is violence. That is domination. Because if I turn around and say, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing that, I'm not paying this, I'm not doing that, I'm going to get put in prison. So, So,
no, exactly.
But I think that's pretty much covers it all.
I really liked the book. I thought it was a good book.
No, me too, man. I'm revisiting it after this time has been really useful. Some of these ideas that I come back to now, I think about them even more now from reading the recent stuff around like tech, like stolen attention and stuff, and it just makes Makes sense. I'm
Yeah.
actually going to try and implement some of these in my life.
Yeah, exactly.
The audit decision-making process. I like that one.
Yeah. Well, the book summary will be on the website and along with the actionable ideas, so you can go and check that out there. Our next book, I actually don't know what we're doing yet.
I think it's Anti-Fragile.
Anti-Fragile
Are we gonna...
by Nassim Taleb.
Yeah?
Yeah, sounds good.
Are you nearly finished?
Because we're on the... Because you put me under pressure, yeah, of course. Yeah. No,
but we still got time.
Exactly. Yeah, cool. So that will be next. Make sure you stay tuned for that. That will probably be a two-parter, I'm assuming. It's quite like
I would have thought so. Something like that.
book.
Yeah.
Got a lot in there. But it actually ties a lot in with this and the psychology of totalitarianism. A lot of it is kind of very systemic based, I think. How these systems are like designed and how they can like naturally we're all flawed as individuals to some degree, and some seek power more than others, yes. But I think a lot of it is also how our like society is designed, how the systems that govern it are designed. And so having an anti-fragile system is probably pretty good. So
there you go.
Hopefully we have a lot of links for that.
We'll catch everybody then.
Yeah. All right, that's a wrap.
It's a wrap.